You've noticed it, haven't you? The strange inverse relationship between how much you share and how much you actually accomplish. The more you talk about your goals, the less likely you are to achieve them. The more you perform your transformation publicly, the more you stay exactly the same. There's something you need to understand about the modern condition. We've become addicted to the performance of growth while simultaneously sabotaging actual growth. We post our gym selfies on day one. We announce our business ideas before we've written a single line of code. We broadcast our intentions like they're achievements, and then we wonder why we never follow through. Here's what's really happening. Every time you externalize your transformation, you drain the internal pressure required to actually transform. This isn't moral judgment. This is neurological fact. When you tell people about your goals, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurochemical reward you'd get from actually accomplishing those goals. You get the satisfaction without the sacrifice, the applause without the achievement. And your nervous system, that ancient survival mechanism, says good enough and promptly goes back to sleep. But there's something deeper, something more insidious at play here. You're not just robbing yourself of motivation. You're subjecting yourself to what sociologists call social surveillance pressure. The moment you make your transformation public, you invite an audience. And audiences don't just watch, they judge, they project, they drag you into their own narrative about who you should be and what you should become. This is the core paradox. The validation you seek by sharing your journey is the exact thing that prevents the journey from succeeding. You thought transparency would create accountability. But what it actually created was performance anxiety, external locus of control, and 1,000 invisible hands pulling you back toward the mean. You thought community would support you. But what community often does is domesticate you, keep you comprehensible, keep you safe, keep you small. So let me tell you about a different path. A path that the truly transformed have always known. A path that feels counterintuitive, lonely, even frightening, but works with ruthless efficiency. The path of strategic disappearance. Let's establish the psychological framework for why disappearing works, because this isn't some mystical spiritual bypass, this is hard neuroscience and behavioral psychology. What we're talking about is the deliberate cultivation of what psychologists call intrinsic motivation environments. Spaces where your drive comes from internal satisfaction rather than external reward. When you remove the social feedback loop, you force your brain to find meaning in the process itself, not in the performance of the process. Research from NYU psychologist Peter Gollwitzer demonstrated that when people announce their goals publicly, they experience what's called social reality. Their minds trick them into believing they've already accomplished the goal simply because they've received social acknowledgement for it. The identity shift happens prematurely. You become the person who's getting fit before you've actually gotten fit. And your brain, satisfied with this new social identity, loses the urgency to make it physically real. This connects to what neuroscientists identify as the default mode network, the brain's baseline state when it's not engaged with the external world. This network is responsible for self-reflection, imagination, and internal narrative construction. When you're constantly broadcasting your journey, you never allow your DMN to do its deep work. You're always in performance mode, always in social cognition mode. Your transformation becomes a show you're putting on rather than an internal revolution you're experiencing. Think of it like this. Your psyche is a garden. Real growth happens underground, in darkness, where roots establish themselves in silence before anything breaks the surface. But modern social culture is obsessed with the visible, the flowers, the fruits, the aesthetic display. So we keep digging up our seeds to check if they're growing. We keep broadcasting our garden plans before we've turned a single spadeful of soil, and then we wonder why nothing blooms. What happens in the shadows, in what I call strategic invisibility, is that you create a pressure chamber for transformation. Navy SEALs don't train in public. Olympic athletes don't live stream every training session. Artists don't show you every failed sketch. Why? Because mastery requires private failure. And private failure requires a space where your ego isn't on the line with every attempt. When you disappear, you also escape what sociologists call social proof dependency, the psychological need to have your reality validated by others. Most people can't sustain effort if they're not getting regular external confirmation that their effort matters. But the truly transformed, They've rewired their nervous system to generate validation internally. They've made themselves the only audience that matters. This is what philosophers from Marcus Aurelius to Miyamoto Musashi understood. True power is cultivated in private. Public displays of power are often compensations for internal weakness. But power built in shadow, that's the kind that can't be taken away because nobody even knew it was being built. Now let's talk about what staying visible actually costs you, because the price is higher than you think. Every person you tell about your transformation becomes a potential saboteur. Not because they're evil. Not because they don't love you. But because their brain is wired to maintain homeostatic equilibrium in their social environment. When you change dramatically, you disrupt the social system. You make other people confront their own stagnation. You become a mirror reflecting what they haven't done. And the human response to that discomfort. Pull you back down. Make you relatable again. Manageable again. Safe again. They'll do it with subtle skepticism. Are you sure that's realistic? They'll do it with concerned trolling. I just don't want to see you get hurt. They'll do it with jokes that cut deeper than humor should. Oh, here we go again with another one of your phases. Each comment is a tiny anchor, weighing you down, reminding you that transformation is deviant, uncomfortable, threatening to the social order. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about this extensively. How the herd fears the individual who rises above mediocrity, how society conspires to keep everyone at the same level through shame, mockery, and the enforcement of normalcy. He called it the pathos of distance, the psychological space between the transformed and the comfortable. And that distance creates tension, discomfort, resentment. But here's the existential weight of it. When you stay visible during transformation, you're not just dealing with external sabotage. You're dealing with internal fragmentation. You're trying to become a new person while simultaneously maintaining the old person's relationships, the old person's social identity, the old person's comfortable patterns. You can't serve two masters. You can't simultaneously evolve and stay recognizable. Metamorphosis requires dissolution. The caterpillar doesn't gradually add wings while remaining a caterpillar. It liquefies completely in the cocoon. It dies to its old form before it can emerge as something new. And that process, it's violent. It's lonely. It requires you to mourn the old you even while you're building the new you. It requires you to sit with the discomfort of not being understood, not being seen, not being validated. This is the grief that disappearing asks of you. The grief of temporarily losing your social identity to gain your authentic self. Most people can't pay this price. They'd rather have the comfort of being known than the power of becoming unknown. They'd rather have the security of familiar relationships than the uncertainty of total reinvention. They'd rather be understood as they are than misunderstood as they're becoming. But you, if you're still reading this, you're different. You understand that some prices are worth paying. That some losses are necessary for greater gains. That sometimes you have to die before you can be reborn. So what does this actually look like in practice? How do you disappear correctly? Because most people get this wrong, they confuse isolation with strategic invisibility, avoidance with intentional withdrawal. You'll need to practice radical information containment. This means you stop casually sharing your life. Not just your goals, your life. Where you're going. What you're doing. Who you're becoming. You become a closed system. Your family will ask why you're being distant. Your friends will wonder why you're not posting anymore. Let them wonder. Their curiosity is not your responsibility to satisfy. This isn't antisocial, it's selectively social. You're not abandoning relationships. You're choosing which relationships get access to which parts of you. And during transformation, almost no one gets access to the process. They can meet the result. You'll need to eliminate what I call premature disclosure. Stop announcing projects before they're complete. Stop sharing plans before they're executed. Stop seeking advice from people who haven't accomplished what you're trying to accomplish. Every word you speak about your transformation before it's solidified is energy leaked, pressure released, potential wasted. You'll need to rewire your validation circuitry. This is the hardest part. You've been conditioned since childhood to seek external approval. Gold stars. Good grades. Likes. Comments. Shares. Your nervous system is literally addicted to social validation. Going dark means going through withdrawal. You'll feel invisible. Irrelevant. You'll question whether what you're doing even matters if no one sees it. This is the crucial psychological threshold. Can you sustain effort without external validation? Because if you can't, you'll never truly transform. You'll always be dependent on an audience to tell you who you are. You'll experience what therapists call relational renegotiation. The people in your life are used to a certain version of you. When you withdraw to transform, they'll unconsciously try to pull you back to the familiar version. They'll invite you to old habits, remind you of old patterns, make you feel guilty for changing. You'll need to hold your boundary without explanation, without justification, without seeking their understanding. You'll face the terror of autonomous existence. When you're not constantly checking in with others, you have to trust yourself, your judgment, your direction, your truth. Most people avoid this by staying in constant contact with others, not because they're social, but because they're terrified of being alone with their own mind. You'll need to develop what Buddhists call right secrecy, the wisdom to know what to reveal and when. Not everything sacred should be shared. Not every victory needs to be broadcast. Some transformations are so profound they lose their power when spoken about. They need to be embodied, not explained. These aren't coping strategies. These are liberation practices. Each one frees you from the invisible prison of social performance. Each one returns your power to where it belongs, inside you, not outside in the opinions of others. So here's how you actually do this. Here's the practical path. First, you create your disappearance container. Pick a specific time frame, 3 months, 6 months, a year. This isn't forever. This is strategic withdrawal for intentional transformation. Tell the people who need to know that you'll be less available. Then become less available. Second, you architect your shadow work. What are you actually building in the darkness? Be ruthlessly specific. Not get in shape, lose exactly 30 pounds, hit a 225-pound bench press, run a sub-7-minute mile. Not start a business, generate $10,000 in monthly revenue with a specific product by a specific date. Vague goals die in the shadows. Specific targets thrive there. Third, you build your internal validation engine. Create private rituals that reinforce your progress. A journal only you read. A tracking system only you see. A reward structure that has nothing to do with social approval. You're training your nervous system to derive satisfaction from internal metrics, not external applause. Fourth, you embrace the metamorphosis discomfort. There will be weeks where you feel like you're losing yourself. Where you question everything. Where you want to reach out, reconnect, go back to the familiar. This is the liquefaction stage. This is necessary. The caterpillar doesn't feel good while it's dissolving, but it's the only way to become a butterfly. Fifth, you plan your re-emergence carefully. This is where most people fail. They disappear, transform, and then come back desperately seeking validation for their changes. Don't come back different, but come back quiet. Let your transformation speak through your presence, not your words. The people who matter will notice. The people who don't notice don't matter. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But I'd add this, the price of that privilege is the willingness to become unrecognizable to everyone who knew who you used to be. You're not going dark because you're antisocial. You're going dark because you're serious. Because you understand that real transformation isn't a spectator sport. Because you've realized that the opinions of others, even well-meaning others, are often the greatest obstacle to becoming who you're meant to become. The world is full of people who will watch your transformation and critique it. The world needs more people who will disappear into their transformation and emerge undeniable. You don't need to be seen to be valid. You don't need to be understood to be successful. You don't need permission to become powerful. You just need the courage to vanish into the work, to trust the process when no one's watching, to build in silence what will eventually speak so loudly that silence becomes impossible. And here's what you'll discover in those shadows. The only opinion that was ever real was yours. The only validation that ever mattered was your own. The only transformation that counts is the one you do for you, not for the audience, not for the applause, but for the sacred purpose of becoming whole. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who's been performing instead of transforming. Subscribe for more psychology that cuts through the noise. And remember, the caterpillar doesn't announce it's becoming a butterfly. It just disappears into the cocoon and does the work. Your transformation doesn't need an audience. It needs commitment. Now disappear and get to work.